My name is LULU and I am a freshman studying a BFA in Theme Entertainment at the University of Southern California, and I will be your moderator for the night. So, Immersive Research Series follows the format of 360. So, 3 panelists presenting 6 images each of a thematic meeting point, the 0. And in this case, that thematic meeting point will be space creation in different mediums. So each presentation will be about 10 minutes, and then we will have a sort of guided discussion which will conclude at about 8:15ish. Then we will have a reception in the garden with light refreshments, drinks and snacks. And we want to invite guests to interact with the panelists and ask any questions that the panel might have brought up for them. So our first presentation will be from David REIMAN, the director of the Livonian Cinema. Take it away, David.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Ruth. So this first slide comes to us courtesy of the Center of Land Use Interpretation and their Coast Realty Archive, which is a collection of thousands of obsolete real estate listings that the center dusted, scanned, and entered into a navigable map on their website. This real estate firm was right next door to it and the Museum of Dress Technology, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It's in particular shows a bungalow court that I and my neighbors used to live in off of National Boulevard and Livonia Avenue in West LA. Once quite common throughout the city, these multifamily dwellings offered affordable housing and then communal spaces, inspired community through these shared public spaces, typically a garden in front. I used to live there with good friends, both roommates and neighbors. And it's the namesake of the traveling theater that I'll talk about a few slides in. It was also walking distance to an institution in Culver City called the Museum of Jurassic Technology. Next slide, please. For those who haven't been, the Museum of Jurassic Technology is inspired by the first public museums. Museums that were encyclopedic in nature before there were distinctions of art museums or science museums or natural history museums. Presenting objects that somewhere or another elicit curiosity in the visitor. The image on the screen is taken from a book called Foundations of the Stereoscopic Cinema, Study of Depth, written by an experimental filmmaker, inventor, Puff the Magic Dragon lyricist, Lenny Lipton. And here we see a diagram for the stereoscope devised by another polymath, Sir Charles Wheatstone, who used a series of mirrors, A prime and A there, reflecting images into each eye that creates the illusion of depth, known as stereopsis. Let's see. The Museum of Dress Technology employs three-dimensional devices such as these throughout the halls of its museum to bring visitors into near contact with ideas, traditions, and beliefs that otherwise are perhaps elusive or inaccessible. I volunteered and worked at the museum for over 10 years now, learning and tinkering with some of these old technologies, the principles of which predate not only motion pictures, but photography as well. Next slide. Upstairs, next to a hall of Soviet space dog portraits, the Museum of Dress Technology has a 14-seat movie theater where they present their own 3D movies with dimensional sound. The movies on rotation now are all travelogues of sorts that, broadly speaking, give glimpses of places, stories, and ways of life from far away. Existing outside the normal modes of movie distribution, the museum's Jewel Box Theater draws in audiences of all kinds. While some people seek these movies out, most stumble onto them by happenstance. Either way, this way of seeing or movie-going lends itself to discovery. Starting in 2017 or so, I asked the folks at the museum if I could borrow equipment to make some more experiments. Here behind me is a scene from a shoot at Kenneth Hahn. 2 lenses are attached to action cameras, RXOs, that capture left and right eye images for stereoscopic video. The rubber ears, seen there, used for acupuncture, have holes in them with omnidirectional microphones that capture binaural audio. When listened to with headsets, it creates the illusion of space. And then the funny fuzzy cone on the top is a cheap mic that captures ambisonic sound, technology that was created over 50 years ago, but which is used more recently with VR. It captures audio from multiple axes, and then when processed for whatever speaker system you're using, whether it's headset or multiple speakers in a room, creates a spherical sound space. With these tools, I set out to make small movie portraits with 3D image and sound that I could present in the spaces themselves with the help of an outdoor screen. When visitors showed up, I would hand out active polarized glasses and wireless headset. My hope was to create the uncanny effect I admired in the museum address technology, but to bring this effect to places we've been before or nearby, but maybe perhaps went unnoticed. One of the first movies made using this process followed the flight paths of planes taking off over Dockweiler Beach at sunset. We would watch the movie by the fire pits at Dockweiler with the outdoor screen on a weeknight, and the sound of planes mingled with the stereo playback in people's ears. It was pretty fun to see people taking off their headsets and seeing where the sound came from. Next slide, please. So now you can put on your glasses. When I made this, I think I inverted the glasses. So blue should be on the left eye. So blue cyan should be on the left eye, not the right eye. In 2019, our landlord sold the Livonian Bungalow Court to a developer with plans to demolish and build new luxury apartments in its stead. In a state of flux, which lingered into the pandemic, we started a project called the Livonian Cinema. The goal was to make site-specific movie nights, or immersive home movies, that, in distinction to moviegoing as a form of escapism, connected audiences to the places they visited, or in this case, lived. The first movie we showed was screened in the driveway you see here. The movie was a goodbye to the first of us to move out. It also told the story of the Livonian people, who I learned were seafaring pagans who live off the Gulf of Riga between Latvia and Estonia, and for centuries faced the threat of destruction. The Livonian language is now only spoken by 30 or so people as a second language. For the movie nights at Livonia, we would typically show programs of short movies or feature films for our immediate neighbors and friends in the community. Next slide. Great. As the pandemic shut all civic and cultural life down, the Livonian Cinema sought out outdoor spaces throughout Southern California that would kindly take us in. The first of these events was a series of Chinese films beyond the moon gate of the Velaslavasay Panorama, entitled Electric Shadows on Penglai Mountain. For each screening, we made 3D lenticular postcards to remember our time together. Lenticular postcards, for those who aren't familiar, are those postcards that you'll see in a novelty gift store or a gas station that have the ridged plastic film on the front. And so with stereo, you'll see a left eye and a right eye with, as in the case of your glasses, a blue and red image. But with these, the lenses focus on lines of interlaced frames. So you're seeing a stereo pair at all times, but depending on the tilt of the card, you're seeing different stereo pairs. So the way we've shot postcards for the Livonian, we've either used a slider or a video camera on a gimbal, but each of the postcards has about 30 to 50 frames of images, and in this case, it flips from day to night, and they're made by hand very tediously. Let's see. So yeah. Other sites we have visited since include Rubel Castle in Glendora, Los Arboles Rocket Ship Park in Torrance, String Crane Conservatory in Mid-City, Zorthian Ranch in Altadena, the Brazilian Mall in Palms, La Laguna Playground in San Gabriel, a Little League field in San Pedro overlooking the Port of LA, and most recently a test run of a new live scored film at the Bike Kitchen in East Hollywood. We're slowly adding movie nights to a navigable map on the Livonian Cinema's website, kind of like Center for Land Use Interpretation's website of real estate listings. And we hope to add more in the days to come. Next slide, please. Okay, so this shot I took yesterday with a recently released cheap X-Reel 3D camera. I'm sure some folks here know of it. This is the shared common space of Livonia. So this was where we lived. It was supposed to be demolished years ago, but I work around here and I see it from time to time. I'll walk by and it's just, I don't really have much to say about that other than it's very poignant to me. It's it's heartbreaking in a way just to see these empty homes without people. But in another sense, it's kind of magical to see my friend Paula's garden just overgrowing, full of life. And when I originally sought out to do the Livonia, it was during a hard time. We were getting evicted. There was the pandemic. There's almost kind of a morbid quality to it of me just trying to connect with places I knew where we were going to lose. And I just wanted to appreciate it myself and have people appreciate it along with me. But seeing this place, what I really appreciate is just that life happens in ways that you don't really expect, still can be sad, but it's just something that I find interesting going forward. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, David. Our next presentation will be from Richard LeMarchand, a professor at USC Games.
Try and do this. Thanks, Lulu, and good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm very honored to be taking part in the inaugural Immersive Research session, and to be very honored to be up here alongside Sarah and David. I admire both your work very much. So, as Lulu said, I'm a professor. I'm actually a game designer with a background in the mainstream of the game industry. And I've been a professor of games just down the street at USC for 12 years now. I teach in the USC Games program, and I'm posted in the School of Cinematic Arts. Next slide, please, Ruby. So my interest in immersive digital media goes all the way back to my early childhood and an episode of Doctor Who where the Doctor pursues his arch rival, the Master, into the simulated reality of The Matrix. This is a long time before the Wachowskis films. This episode really shook me up. It seemed like the experience of virtual reality seemed like a kind of waking dream or perhaps nightmare, and perhaps contributed to my eventually studying physics and philosophy at university, where philosophy of mind was my favorite subject. As a game designer, I've remained intensely curious about psychology and philosophy, including the hard problem of consciousness, where nothing in physics accounts for how a part of the universe, like a human being, can have subjective experience. And I'm really going to focus perhaps a little more on experiential aspects of immersion rather than spaces, although in my mind they kind of collapse together a little bit. Across the course of my lifetime, films, television, and music, I think, have kind of bled over into other art forms like video games, virtual reality experiences, and themed entertainment. And in doing so, they, like all art, have helped shed some light on what it means to be a person in all of our agency and intersubjectivity. Next slide, please. So for many years, I felt rather mistrustful of the words immersion and immersive, since to a details-oriented designer like me, they seemed uncomfortably like they could be buzzwords without a really clear meaning. And I later came to understand the reason for my confusion. As my friend Gordon Kaleha describes in his excellent book, In Game, From Immersion to Incorporation, when we use the word immersion to talk about artistic and entertainment experiences, it could have one of two quite radically different meanings. We can talk about immersion as transportation, the type of immersion used, of course, by virtual reality, immersive theater, strongly themed park experiences like Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland, and painting diorama experiences like our beloved Velaslavasay Panorama. In immersion as transportation, our senses are supplied with stimuli that lead us to perceive that we are in a place other than our actual location in the real world. When we use technology to transport us, it's called telepresence in some cases, and we can imagine piloting a humanoid robot body around on the surface of the moon, seeming to us like we are actually present on the moon while we're actually still here on Earth. But, and this was the source of my confusion, we can also talk about immersion as absorption. This is the kind of immersion that we're discussing when we talk about any designed experience that we find particularly engaging, involving, or even addicting. Films and books can be immersive in this sense, and of course games and play can be profoundly absorbing, as can all the other interactive things we do on our phones and computers. Social media, maybe most of all. Games and other interactive media forms are particularly interesting to me because people bring their agency to bear on the experience in a way that shapes the experience from within, of course, and which leads to, I think, a profoundly different quality of psychological, artistic consequence. As Marcus de Soto says in his book Around the World in 80 Games, a novel can move you to tears, but a game can make you feel guilty for your actions. And there are some interesting edge cases here in the corner of my slide. Where does realism in representation fit in, or suspension of disbelief, or identification with fictional characters? I think we have more to figure out here. Maybe there are more types and subcategories of immersion. Next slide, please, Ruby. So in 2012, I gave a talk at the annual Game Developers Conference called Attention, Not Immersion. Now that Gordon's helped me understand things, when I give this talk, I call it Attention and Immersion. And in this talk, I encourage game developers to think about the ways in which video games initially attract people's attention to the game and then hold people's attention over time. And I propose this model of 3 domains, each of which gets and holds people's attention with different degrees of strength or urgency. From beauty aesthetics contrast, which easily gets attention but doesn't seem to hold it for very long, to story narrative social, which isn't as quickly impactful in getting attention, but which can hold people's attention very well over time, between, say, episodes of a TV show or even movies in a series, all the way over to what I call gameplay ludism systems, where the audience's agency is really fully in play. I think this category is actually quite hard to get someone's attention with, as I'm sure you know if you've ever tried to teach a complicated board game to someone who's not particularly interested to learn it. But once enjoyable, well-designed gameplay has got its hooks into us, it can hold our attention for ages, right? Maybe hundreds of hours, maybe even for a lifetime. This was the case for Marcel Duchamp, famously, who essentially threw away his art career to devote himself to the study of chess. Next slide, please. So this model helped me to make sense of the aesthetics of my own work, both in video games and in the VR projects I've made at USC. In the game industry, I worked on games like Gex, Jak and Daxter, and Uncharted, which use action game mechanics like running, jumping, fighting, along with some puzzle solving. But they also use storytelling techniques with voiceovers and animated scenes that might convey drama or tell jokes or even create moments of emotional intimacy or vulnerability. In that way, I've always thought that video games are kind of a meta art form. They can use techniques and offer the aesthetics of almost any other type of artistic expression. And this idea isn't new, of course. In 1827, Karl Trandolph coined the term Gesamtkunstwerk to describe an all-embracing art form. This idea was later popularized by Richard Wagner in the context of ultra-spectacular opera. Do video games use immersion as transportation or as absorption? Well, I think it's a little bit of both. When we're on the couch playing a video game on a TV screen, I don't think we're transported in anything near the same degree as when we're wearing a virtual reality headset or standing in a beautifully designed panorama. But maybe we feel transported a little bit because of that willing suspension of disbelief that storytellers have always traded in. And maybe if we've got a really massive TV in front of us. Of course, we get absorbed by any storytelling in the game. We get very strongly absorbed by the gameplay, which might put us into that famous flow state described by the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, with all of its attendant good feelings and distortion of time perception and loss of self-awareness. Next slide, please, Ruby. So the virtual reality games I made as part of my academic and artistic research practice in the USC Game Innovation Lab, founded by Professor Tracy Fullerton, one of LULU's professors, were very different from my commercial work. The first of them, The Meadow, was made with my colleague Professor Marzi Campos and combines design techniques from both virtual reality and themed entertainment. It was a kind of interactive, immersive musical encounter with a group of strange creatures in a woodland grove. And we used the gaze as a method of interacting with objects in the virtual world. You could cause changes in objects just by looking straight at them. And we also used gaze control on my next VR project, a game with the most pretentious title that I could think of for a VR game, Phenomenology. It was inspired by my love of artists in the light and space movement, and also by my genuine interest in this branch of philosophy that deals with the perceptual objects of consciousness. It's a game of short vignettes, some of which are like interactive music videos. Some of them are stereoscopic live-action video clips filmed using this special camera, the Jaunt camera. They sadly went out of business, but I was very lucky to get to work with this, which shot 360 immersive live action. So one last thing for me to say about the both these projects, of course, use immersion as transportation and create some immersion as absorption. We had fun using techniques from those first two domains, beauty and narrative, with just a sprinkling of gameplay thrown in. So yeah, the last thing I'll say about the aesthetics of immersive spaces, I think there's a particular challenge for designers using this kind of immersion as transportation to do with the rigid unity of narrative viewpoint that it requires. Let me explain a little bit what I mean. Of course, movies and TV routinely jump around between the viewpoints of many different characters in the narrative in order to tell the story in an absorbing way, cutting between the protagonist and the secondary character and other characters and maybe even the antagonist. But it's very hard to do that in VR without confusing the audience, right? And it's arguably impossible to do it in physical immersive spaces. The audience member is either embodied as themselves or maybe they're role-playing as just one single character the whole time. So maybe immersion as transportation puts some limits on the storytelling parts of immersion as absorption, and instead perhaps we'll need to focus more on that gameplay systems category in order to keep people absorbed for the duration of their transportation. However, something I love about art making is that any rules you come up with are destined eventually to be broken, and I hope I'll be proven wrong about all this, maybe by somebody in this room. Anyway, I've said enough for now. I'm looking forward to our Q&A session. Thanks very much for your attention, everyone.
Thank you, Richard. Our final presentation will be from SARA Velas, the founder and co-curator of the space we're in, the Velaslavasay Panorama.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad we're all here together for the inaugural session of the Immersive Research Session. I talk about this diagram a lot. I began the Velaslavasay Panorama 25 years ago on Hollywood Boulevard. And the principles of the panorama as an art form and an interface are best described by this diagram. Some of you are probably already familiar with it, but I still think it's interesting to revisit the fact that a panorama, as it was classically defined, was a technology, or is still a technology. And technology isn't always involving electricity. So the interface for what a panorama, the word panorama, originally meant was an experience where you go down a dark hallway and up a spiral staircase, and you're on a restricted platform where in front of you, you can look out onto a landscape vista, and there is a photoron, or a three-dimensional terrain in front of you, that would be the D, And the umbrella on top of you is restricting the edge of your vision so that you can feel more like you are looking out onto an expansive space rather than in a contained view or a rectangle. And the indirect lighting feeds into this experience and a synthesis of a two-dimensional painting and a three-dimensional terrain and an embodied experience wandering around this platform. It's kind of simple but complex at the same time, because if you took away any of these features, it wouldn't be the same type of thing. And so the experiential nature of approaching a panorama, even to the point of the architecture that you encounter before you even get into that dark hallway, is crafting you into a new state of mind. So I got really focused on panoramas when I was in college in St. Louis in the 90s. And part of my learning and interest in panoramas was highly involved with travel, because I wanted to see these 360 built environments, many from the 19th century, but not all. Here I am in Austria in 1999. This is me in Zhengzhou, China in the probably around 2013. This is me in Hungary in around 2016, and that's me in Pyongyang in 2013. So panoramas from the 20th and 21st century involved, along with 19th century panoramas. So this like building of anticipation of an immersive experience is part of the thing itself. And so thinking about a container which contains an immersive experience, even how you approach the container, both physically and kind of mentally, I think is very huge. And so even when these things are operating on kind of like below consciousness levels or sort of subtle, even a night like tonight where we've staged the lighting and our seating in a specific way, these are tools of immersive experience. And while I do spend quite a lot of time talking about panoramas, meaning like a 360 painting, terrain, hallway, all of that, I think a lot of the projects that the colleagues and I here at the Velaslavasay Panorama work on are also immersive, even when they're not a 360 panorama. So, the Union Square Florist Shop. This was a project we developed in 2020 and 2021, where given the restrictive conditions of COVID, meaning that people were distanced, breathing air together was dicey, we designed an experience that meant no one ever entered the building. And so this, some of you here were there, but we had an activity happening in our lobby, and then the public was invited to visit and be outside looking in from the sidewalk. And so clearly over here I am in the kind of vitrine of our lobby with Ruby Carlson and some other folks happening, so we're clearly immersed in what we were doing. But I also think that like the people staring in from the sidewalk were having a very immersive experience for a couple of different reasons. Some of it was just the curiosity of not having been together in collective space for so long. So we had a kind of special opportunity because of the COVID restrictions. But there were also other interjections. So not only were they kind of like peeping through the window, but you could call a phone number that would give a recording. You could tune into a radio station that would give insight onto this florist shop. And so we wanted to figure out a way to create something immersive where people couldn't really be in an enclosed space together. The Union Square Florist Shop's hotline or phone number is still active, and I encourage you all to call it. Now I'd like to talk about RenderCon. And this is like a world that it felt like an alien visiting this place. So on April 15th, 2025, I had a special invitation to attend RenderCon. And this was the Render Network's first in-person conference. This is an initiative founded by Jules Urbach. And this is I'm still kind of trying to sort it out. So I'm a super novice here, but basically a company that is involved in a nonprofit rendering thing, where rendering meaning digital creation of imagery. They're taking care of a special IP archive, but they're also doing very high level, multi-megapixel rendering opportunity for creating sneaker advertisements, and there was all these terminologies. And so this first panel that I visited was SimPlates. It was basically a way to create artificially rendered backdrops as film studio. So if you wanted to create, the example that was shared with me was a bunch of digital ferns at 17K pixels with then three-dimensional ferns in front of it for your car commercial, then we can do that. We've got SimPlates. And that to me, I was they're talking about a panorama. If you've got digital backdrop, digital 2D ferns, physical 3D ferns. And I was also just kind of floored by all the tech thing. I've never been to a thing like this before. This was in Hollywood on April 15th this year. But I did bring some flyers. I don't know, was anybody else here at RenderCon? Okay, so it didn't work. But maybe next one. Maybe they'll come to the next one. But in the next slide, we'll see why it's so curious that this company, Otoy, actually, is pairing this very sophisticated digital stuff, and they also have the Roddenberry archive. So that is Star Trek. And it's kind of crazy. I feel learning about some of this stuff, we're in some kind of new phase of acting for cinema, because I learned about something called a digital prosthesis. So they've been making some videos that give an opportunity for Spock to still create new stories. And this is an actor who here's an opportunity where he's wearing a little bit of makeup, but basically in real time, he's wearing a digital prosthesis of Leonard Nimoy as Spock, because Leonard Nimoy is no longer with us. He's passed away. And so he's emulating this guy acting as a character, but also in his own body, and then you could see his, and it's just the layers of reality here. It was just what's going on here? This is so interesting. So I was kind of thinking about how okay, you had silent film, that was a particular type of acting, then sound comes in, and that's a new kind of acting where you're actually using your voice, and then you have I guess there's also acting with a ton of makeup and weird stuff to make you into a crazy goopy alien or a dead body. But now here's something in between where not only are you sort of wearing a little bit of makeup, but you've got a digital prosthesis, but this is an actor acting like an actor, acting like a character. And so what are we gonna do in 50 years when who's gonna be acting like who? We're rehashing and doing all this stuff. But I'm still processing what happened at RenderCon. Also to be I'm probably some of you folks have done this stuff, but the budget, I can't, the money used for this event, which was lovely, it was beautiful, the food was amazing, but look at those flowers. I feel whatever was spent to have this showcase could run our engine here at Velaslavasay for 4 years or something. And they had socks, they were giving out free socks. But it was also really special to see the folks who are so dedicated to this canon of Star Trek that they're this image on the lower part here. So they're using bits from, and then there was like new acronyms I'd never learned because there's like, I think it was the TOS, so the original series, because of course there's many, within the Star Trek universe, there's like Deep Space Nine, The Next Generation, all these things. And so they would take a scene, like a very, like maybe like a 3-second scene from a Star Trek episode and completely recreate it in digital space that you could either interface with a like a joystick type thing, which is how they had it at the conference, but also be in a VR headset. And like the elegant details that, so this panel with the Enterprise there was a guy who's a coder, creator of this stuff. He was like talking about how he figured out that in this scene in the engineering of the original series from the mid 20th century, they figured out that the way that the lights were blinking in the engineering area was basically somebody was like behind the scenes was holding up a wooden board with different colors of gels and the light was on. And so they were just going up and down and up and down. And that was how they made it look like a computer. And so then this person coded the math to figure out that like rhythm in digital, and is like, what are we like, wow, we're like if those people could have had that tool and then he's doing that tool, and it just was, I'm still processing it. I don't like RenderCon, but really interesting, and I feel lucky I got to experience it and learn about people who are like saying things on stage about their sneaker stuff where they're like, some people know us for our work with Houdini, but others just know us about our airdrop sneaker pushes. And it was like new language, and there are worlds of digital creation out there that, I mean, there's something immersive with it, but then again, it's like, what's going on here? I'd like to get down to the bottom of it more.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for your presentations. So now I'd like to move into our guided discussion where I'll have a few prompts for our panelists. First, starting with David again, I'd like to ask you to talk about another immersive project that you're interested in.
Thank you. I used this opportunity to, I think this is the world premiere of the soundtrack of the Temenos. So this image that you see, that tiny little white square right there, is a movie screen. And last year, I went with my wife, Aicha, to Greece with friends of the Panorama, Ted and Melissa. And in a very remote region of the Peloponnese in Greece, a filmmaker lived. And he was originally a Greek American, but he withdrew his experimental films from distribution. He was part of like Anthology Film Archive in the day. His name was Gregory Markopoulos. He was disheartened by the way distribution worked and pulled it all, moved here with his lover, and he worked on this epic film that he created towards the end of his life that was never shown while he was alive. But he gave strict stipulations as to how it was shown. So every 4 years, they show 4 nights of this immensely long screening, which is mostly, to be honest, just like black leader and white leader with just little tiny glimpses of film in between. So when you're watching it, it's kind of like being in a sensory deprivation tank where like everything becomes super heightened. Like I've only done it once, but I remember being just unnerved by like I can feel the teeth pressing into my gums and hearing that sound. So like here in the sound here, you could hear the generator and the crickets and people snoring, and it becomes just bombastic. You know, Aicha and I were watching the Big Dipper descend behind the screen every night, and that kind, the films themselves, meh, but the attention that it asked of us and that we were actually experiencing our surroundings was really special. And I think there may be more immediately appealing instances of that are less demanding. But even just like with a tiny bit of that demand, it can really be gratifying for someone to pay attention in ways that I myself struggle with in my day-to-day.
Thank you, David. Okay, next, with the same prompt, Richard, I'd love to ask you to talk about another immersive project that you're interested in.
Yes, I'm not sure if everybody here is familiar with the work of Punch Drunk. They're a British-American immersive theatre company. They're best known for their very famous and long-running piece, Sleep No More. For those of you who don't know Sleep No More, they set decorated a warehouse in Soho in New York to look like a hotel in the 1920s. And then they devised this narrative that it was a hotel that had been funded, but then on the eve of the Great Depression, the hotel was shut down and sealed, and now it has been unlocked. And all of the audience members got masks, these kind of beaked masks, so that you could identify the other audience members. And they released you into this warehouse where you would explore freely of your own volition and then encounter actors who would be actor dancers who would be in encounters with each other. And so people would stand around and watch two actors interacting, and then they would move off through the space, and you could choose to follow one or the other, or you could look through the drawers and read letters. And I went to see this piece twice about 10, 11 years ago, and it rocked my world. I mean, it's what I'd been imagining for a long time, a kind of video game that you could walk around inside of with the most, reality, fidelity, production values, and olfactory design, and very immersive. It wasn't just theatre. It was actually quite digital behind the hood. Lots of, as here in the Velaslavasay Panorama, lots of digitally controlled lighting and sound design. So, and I've been to see two more of Punch Drunk's productions in London, the Burned City and the Drowned Man. And so this summer in New York, their new piece is up. It's written by Daisy Johnson, who's a British author, the youngest person ever to be shortlisted for the Booker Prize. And I haven't read her, but I've read around her, and she seems really interesting. She kind of retools myths in modern settings with feminist themes. And she's written this piece, which I think, if I'm understanding it correctly, is very different for them. I think it's a one-person show where you go in and explore this designed environment of a person's room. So it's up for a few months in New York. I'm excited to try and make it out there. Oh, and if you happen to be in Shanghai, Sleep No More is still running in Shanghai, I believe. So yeah, that's the thing I'm interested in. Thanks, Lily.
And now, Sarah, the same question.
So in October of 2022, I went with a group of folks, including Ruby, to a mansion in Pomona. The Phillips Mansion was built in 1875, but for Halloween spooky season, it was taken over by a group, a project called Delusion, Valley of Hollows. And this is the 13th floor entertainment group who are pretty pervasive in the haunted house experience realm. And the tickets were fairly expensive, I don't know, like $90 each, but it was somebody's birthday. And also, like, built into that was that going there was also a surprise. We went to the Pomona Valley Mining Company, and she didn't know we were taking to her a haunted house, and so that sort of like ratcheted up the experience. But what was so, and also I wanted to represent this, like looking back on this experience, which was so fun and impressionable. Like, I had very few photos of it, and it's not because photos weren't allowed. It was just that, like, I was busy doing the thing, so I wasn't taking pictures left and right. And so they used this historic mansion. I think they do something every year, but this one, I think the narrative had something, it was sort of a culty thing, but my strongest memory of this, like, was at one point, they had everybody like crawling under a basement, and then we had to like run out quickly and like hide in a ditch because the creepy thing was gonna get us. So it was like the danger factor was amazing. Like, we did all have to sign a waiver, but it was sort of like, how fun and cool that we were like being told to get in a ditch. And then they told us to get into the back of a pickup truck. And at one point, the pickup truck like drove us, like 50 feet or something, but like being in a vehicle, like no seatbelts, like it just like, it was so well done. And afterwards I was like, wow, that was a good, like, yes, we all paid $90 each, totally worth it. And it was so much fun. And more danger, please.
Thank you all for your commentary. So before we move on to the next prompt, I want to invite you guys to scan this QR code that's up on the screen, and it'll take you to a link to a sort of word bubble that'll prompt you to, give us a few words or even just one word that describes how you felt about, your reflections about IRS edition number 1. And it'll show up in a word bubble behind us, so don't put anything down you don't want up on the screen. Okay, but I'll let everyone scan that. And our next prompt, we want to invite our panelists to define immersive and talk about what they believe makes something immersive. David, if you'd like to start.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really interesting listening to your distinctions between your forms of immersion. And I've been thinking about it a bit, not just because of the IRS prompt. Was April 15th part of the IRS naming? Maybe. That's great. I think so. But I've been thinking about it even before that. But I feel like now it's so easy for me, at least me personally, and maybe it's generalizable to other folks here, to be distracted. And I value absorption and immersion even more now more than ever. And with, I think there was maybe a peak of VR hype that's now maybe petering and maybe careening down. We'll see how Apple Vision Pro, the next generation, does. But the thing that I appreciate about immersion, what immersion means to me, is an environment that makes me feel completely absorbed versus distracted. There was a professor that I remember that actually wrote about cinema in terms of absorption versus attraction, which is kind of similar to your thing. And he was saying before that silent film and vaudeville was attraction, that you would have this kind of medium that was meant to be a spectacle. And then once sound came along, and maybe even towards the tail end of silent, creating these narratives that absorbed you, where you get involved in the story of it. But to me, it's being in a space like this, where you enter an atmosphere and you feel like there's a charge to it. It creates its own atmosphere that envelops you. And there are certain kinds of experience, like the panorama, that give me that sense of connection. I could spend hours and hours on my phone, but I don't feel absorbed. So the immersion that I'm interested in are experiences that give me a sense of complete, undivided, or as much as that's possible, attention, and then feeling that amongst other people.
Go ahead, Richard.
So, yeah, David, I really like your perspective, and you've got me thinking in some off at right angles a little bit. I too, when I'm sat here in the panorama or when I'm in the Museum of Jurassic Technology, it is this enveloping space where the mood has been set, I think, very carefully, tonally, to prompt a kind of reflection I don't know, I started meditating 3 years ago, and I promised not to become that person who's going to go on and on about their meditation experiences, but it's gotten me oriented a bit more to these, the way that designed experiences can distract us, as you say. They can bedazzle us with spectacle, and maybe sometimes they can sell us bad messages as they do so. I think that for example, the police procedural, the standard American television police procedural is exciting and thrilling and absorbing, and also sells us a lot of bad political messages, a lot of classist and sometimes racist political messages. But I think that similarly, we can use the same techniques to promote more positive messages, to help us reflect on the connections rather than the divisions between us. And I think that, this is a long-standing use of art. And I think that in the history of the way that immersion has been used in modern media, it's maybe more often been used for showy, distracting ways. But I think increasingly, especially among artists, people are starting to think about the other better uses that these techniques might be put to.
Sarah, yes.
Okay. Thinking about immersion, I mean, I really enjoy both of your insightful comments, and ultimately I just see it as like number one, as a kind of, it's a tool, so like you're saying, can be used for enlightening purposes and also propagandistic and seductive bad purposes. I also have to say that now the word immersive seems to be tossed around quite a lot. Like it's just like oh, come to CVS and immersive pharmacy or whatever. Like it just, like it's a word that it's like I get a little prickly where I'm like, what, immersive? Like what? Like let's be, but. That's often what happens with big, was like, oh my God, love that post or whatever, and it's like like a old shoelace or whatever. Like it just, words mean what they mean when we're using them in certain contexts, and I think it's also when thinking about like, well, how would I really define immersion? It's also one of these things where it's like, well, I can't really tell you, but I know it when I see it, kind of thing. It's like, that's the classic pornography description as well. And it is a very slippery word. It's a very, and it can, I mean, I feel like I've personally had moments of what could be kludging things together, but like a oddly immersive moment driving down the 110 freeway and like a certain song comes on and the light is a certain way and I feel like I'm in a movie and like, wow, I just hadn't, what I would call an immersive experience, but it doesn't mean that anytime you're driving in a car or in traffic, that is what that is. And so then we're getting into very philosophical territory, and I think that's why I'm excited about this, continuing this series with all of you, because it's like, we'll probably never really pin this down, but in the attempts to get to the bottom of it, we can learn some new facets about immersive experience.
Okay. Thank you, Ruby, for putting that up. So for my final sort of prompt, I would want to open the floor up to you three and invite you guys to sort of think about any questions you might have for your fellow panelists. So starting with you, David. Is there anything you'd want to ask one of your fellow panelists?
Yeah. So Sarah, when you were drawn to panoramas in the college days, did the idea of immersion, if the word itself didn't exist in your mind, did the way in which you create all of these spaces and events and ephemera, and the way in which there's a performative aspect to the panorama, was that baked in there from the beginning of the interest of it? Or did that grow outside of it? How did that come to be? Because it seems to me to be all-encompassing, to use a panoramic term.
Yeah, I think that's a neat question. And actually, the first thing that came into my head when you said that was like, I remember in college having a November dinner party where we decided to have an orange party, so everybody had to bring something orange. So my friend Jessie from Texas brought like queso, meaning like melted Velveeta cheese, and like, so I guess this kind of like theming thing. But I think the one thread that I'll pull from your question is that like the kind of interface of the community and the way that people interact with things feels so important, and it's hard to sort of nail this down into 2 sentences for me, but like you kind of can't separate the thing from the container, like they're all so threaded together, and that's part of why you know, to put a circular painting in a white cube gallery that is not as I don't know, like inviting for a wider group of folks didn't feel right. And so to come up with a scheme that would be approachable for a wide group of people felt important.
That's really interesting.
So Richard, I'd like to ask, do you remember what was the first game you enjoyed playing when you were really young?
Oh, I do, yes. I do. I've told this story a few times, but it was we live quite close to the south of Wales, and we would go on vacation, and at the seaside they have an amusement arcade, right, in the 70s or the 80s. And we never went to anything like that while we were at home. And I vividly remember I was about 5 or 6 years old, and there was this arcade machine. It was a pre-digital arcade machine, so it didn't have microprocessors in it. It was just transistors and resistors, and it used a zoetrope to create an animating image of a shark swimming towards you. And the game was called Kill a Shark, and there was a pistol. It was an extremely environmentally unsound game, and you had to shoot. It was meant to be like a harpoon pistol, and you had to aim at the shark and shoot it. And I remember my dad had to hold me up. I was much too small to like see into this arcade machine. He had to hold me up, and he allowed me to aim at the shark, and this flickering, because of the quality of the projected zoetrope. I think the zoetrope was spinning below, and there was probably a mirror projecting it up into the screen, and it had this, again, this kind of dreamlike quality that I think we often see with these non-digital immersive technologies, which to me are often much richer than the digital technology, which is so reductive. It's got the quality of the optics in it. So this was my first memory, and I remember, because I was always glued to the television as a toddler, you know, just kind of standing almost with my nose against the TV, fascinated by Star Trek and things like this. And but the idea that you could do something with your hands to affect the outcome on the screen was very compelling for me. But maybe I'll bridge into my question for you, David, because I do think there's an aspect of interactivity that goes undiscussed. I think just the way that, you know, I sit in the panorama, and I sit here and I look here for a while, and I look up here, and the changing of the light gets my attention over here. The way I navigate through the Museum of Jurassic Technology, choosing to linger here, or to take this path, or to get lost and turned around for a minute, I think that's very richly interactive. I think that's activating of people's agency. And so I'm curious, David, you having, and this could also apply to the designed experiences of the Livonian cinema. Is that something that you design? Do you agree with that, first of all? And is that something that you design for? Do you think it has a relationship with the reflective, meditative quality of these spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I first came to the Museum of Jurassic Technology as a visitor and a fan, and I too had that experience. Actually, I think one of the things that just like made me just want to attach myself like a barnacle to it was the first time I went, it was amazing, and the second time I went, all of a sudden, out of nowhere appeared this rooftop garden that just didn't exist before. And with a space like that, it's kind of like did that exist before? I mean, did they unearth it? Was that the first thing that existed? And so you're constantly questioning that. But in terms of making stuff for there, what's really wonderful specifically about making stuff at the museum, and I only participate, on a smaller level, it was founded by David Wilson, and the head curator, Eva, do a lot of work, and I'm just happy to participate when I can. But what's really fun with it is that everything is like, I guess, in the Hollywood terms, a focus group. You don't just make something and put it out into the world and it just is what it is. You see people interact with it, and then you can tinker with it. And you interact with it yourself, and you can always tinker with it. So in a much smaller sense, not like building a rooftop courtyard and putting birds in it, but you can add a sound here, you can add a sound there, you can light something a little bit differently, and it changes it for folks. And then what's really interesting is that, and who knows how this actually works, maybe it's, our own delusion, but when you put attention on something and you change it a little bit, people somehow find their way to it and interact with it instantly. It's really, really interesting. I don't know if it's because it's I'm just hoping that they would see it, so I'm just lingering there waiting for someone to say something, but I don't think that's what it is. It's people actually are drawn to the attention that you give something. And as we were talking about earlier, or as Sarah was mentioning, not imagining putting the panorama in a white box, if you actually make it less white and clear and visible for everything, but dim things and make things obfuscated and just shine a scantest ray of light onto something, it really draws people in, maybe in a meditative way, but also just there's real attention there because they know that you're putting attention on it.
Yeah. That's really interesting. That iterative design process, I think every game designer would recognize very well. Standing something up, seeing how it lands, making tweaks to it on an ongoing basis. But yes, directing, guiding attention, I guess that's a big part of the craft of immersive design. Mm-hmm. And maybe arguably every kind of experience design. So, are we out of time, Lulu?
Okay. Do you have something brief?
Well, I just wanted to see if Sarah had thoughts along similar lines, because every time I come here to the panorama, it's subtly different. Do you iterate in the design, and do you notice changes in people's responses?
Yeah, I think in different ways we're constantly tweaking, optimizing, rearranging, also, mistaking, leaving a box of stuff out that we didn't mean to leave out. But I think also there's this sort of exhibit experience, and then when we have events, changing, where do we put the lemonade this time? And what does the flow of the people do? Is there's playing with the interface a little bit just to see what happens differently, and then of course a different group of people are going to act in a different way, and there's I think about it as a kind of feedback loop where we do a certain thing and we see how people react, and then we do another thing and then they maybe react in a different way. And it just the way that David, you're describing the experience of adjusting things at the Museum of Jurassic Technology is also here it's these places are more of living organisms, or it's a very organic process. And I think it's also for us funny because sometimes people will often ask me oh, well, so what's new at the panorama? It's oh, well, someone just donated us 2 new hat boxes, so we added that to the luggage pile. Is that a new exhibit? That'd be pushing it. But it is something different, so it's it's like a garden that sort of is growing and it's maybe there's a bloom right now, but it wouldn't call it hey everybody, let's see this new exhibit. That's setting expectations way too high, and so that managing expectations is something too.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, we are basically just out of time, but I'm excited to invite everyone to come into the garden to sort of continue the discussion we have going on here. And I want to implore the audience to ask the panelists any questions that they had from the presentations and discussions over light refreshments and snacks out in the back. And with that, thank you so much to our incredible panelists and amazing audience of Immersive Research Series #1.
Thank you, Lulu.